The silent invasion, emerges empire. The silence in space was deafening. For years, humanity had enjoyed peace, and the stars above them had seemed far away, almost unreachable. The world had been moving forward, advancing in technology, and expanding its reach into the galaxy. But out there, in the deep expanse of space, something was lurking, something no one could see. An empire, far older and more advanced than humanity, had begun its slow, deliberate approach. It started with strange reports from a remote human outpost in the farthest reaches of the solar system. At first, it was dismissed as a simple glitch. After all, space was vast, and equipment could malfunction. But as the days passed, the reports became more concerning. The sensors were detecting faint, nearly imperceptible shifts in the surrounding space. Nothing solid, just strange disturbances in the fabric of the stars. But those few who had access to the outpost began to worry. Something wasn't right. Captain Olivia Reed, the commander of the outpost, was used to quiet. She had grown up on a small colony in a far-off corner of the galaxy. To her, the silence of space was a familiar comfort. But this was different. The unsettling feeling gnawed at her every time she glanced at her screens. Her crew had also begun to notice it. The absence of any real activity, the strange signals coming through the comms. At first, it was nothing more than a faint hum, like a distant song. But soon, the hum became louder, more defined. On the third day of the strange phenomenon, the calm was shattered. A sharp, sudden distortion appeared on the radar. It was fleeting, like a shadow passing over a sun, but it was enough. Reed's heart raced in her chest. She ordered the crew to engage every possible sensor to find any sign of life or any physical object in that area of space. Nothing. They saw no ships, no structures, nothing at all. Just the silent void of space. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger. Reed stared at the data, her mind working quickly. The distortion didn't fit any known pattern. It wasn't a meteor or an asteroid. It wasn't a glitch in the equipment. It was deliberate. Someone, was hiding, using technology far beyond what humanity possessed. She looked at her first officer, Lieutenant James Carter, and saw the worry mirrored in his eyes. They were alone out here, in the deepest corner of the galaxy, far from any reinforcements. And now, they were being watched. The crew was growing anxious. They could sense it, just as Reed did. There was an enemy out there, moving silently through space, observing. The tension on the ship was palpable, and Reed could see the unease in the eyes of every crew member she passed. There was something ominous in the air. They were alone in the vastness of space, but they weren't alone anymore. Desperation gripped Reed's heart. Her mind raced. She considered sending a message back to Earth Command, but she knew it would take days for any response to reach them. Even if they did send help, it would be too late. The vast distances of space made any aid too slow. They had to act now before whatever was lurking in the shadows made their move. Reed ordered a full scan of the area, hoping to detect anything that might give them an edge. But the stealth technology was so advanced that even their best equipment failed to pick up any more significant readings. It was as if the enemy had mastered the art of blending into the very fabric of space itself, making them invisible to human sensors. The silence remained, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional clatter of a crew member moving through the halls. Days passed in an eerie stillness, the only movement the slowly blinking lights on the control panels. Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting. The enemy was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. But there was no sign of aggression, no immediate threat. And yet, the feeling of impending danger hung over the ship like a storm cloud. Then, on the seventh day, the stillness was broken, not by an explosion or a missile strike, but by a voice. It came through the ship's comm system, static at first, and then clearer, though faint. Reed's breath caught in her throat as the voice whispered a single phrase. "They're here." The hairs on the back of Reed's neck stood on end. She felt the weight of the words settle over her, heavy and ominous. The silence had been shattered, but the real terror had only just begun. The voice wasn't human. It didn't sound like anything she had ever heard before. It was distant, cold, and alien, carrying a chilling sense of finality. Reed's heart pounded as the words echoed through the ship. The crew was silent, frozen in fear. They all knew, deep down, that they were about to face something far beyond their understanding. The calm they had lived in, the silence of space, was gone. The invaders had arrived. The invisible empire, hidden in plain sight, was making its move. As Reed stood there, staring at the communication screen, a sudden surge of determination filled her. They might be outnumbered and outmatched, but humanity was not a race to back down easily. They had faced the unknown before, and they had always fought back. Now, they would face an enemy whose very presence threatened their existence, and they would not go down without a fight. The real battle had just begun. The first human stand. The ship trembled as the voice faded, leaving the crew in a stunned silence. The unknown words echoed in the minds of every crew member, unsettling them deeply. The reality of what they were facing started to settle in. Captain Olivia Reed paced in front of the command console, her mind racing. The voice wasn't a random signal. It was a warning. They weren't alone anymore. "We can't wait for Earth Command," Reed said firmly, turning to her crew. "We have to act now, before they strike. We are the first line of defense for humanity, and we cannot afford to wait for help that may never come." Lieutenant Carter, her trusted first officer, looked at her with a troubled expression. "But Captain, we have no idea what we're up against. If they can hide in plain sight, how are we supposed to stand a chance?" Reed knew the risk was enormous. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and completely alone, but she had made a promise to her people and to herself that she would not let them fall without a fight. "We use what we have," she replied, her voice steady. "We've got brains, determination, and guts. We may not have their technology, but we know how to fight. And that's enough." The crew was nervous, but Reed's words cut through the tension. The silence that had hung over the ship for days seemed to lift as the crew prepared for what was to come. They set to work, readying the ship for a fight that seemed inevitable. They decided to deploy every weapon they had, preparing for the unknown. Reed had no idea if it would work, but she gave the orders anyway. The humans might not have stealth technology, but they had ingenuity. They were a species that had built their civilization on creativity, and that was their strength. As they moved into position, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The enemy was watching, waiting for them to make a move. Still, they had no choice. The longer they stayed in the silence, the more the fear of being discovered in the dark grew. Just as they activated their pulse scanners, the first real signal came through. A faint pulse in the distance. It was like a shadow cutting across the stars. It was subtle, almost undetectable, but it was there. For the first time, they were not just reacting to fear. They were about to face the threat head-on. Reed ordered the crew to power up the pulse weapon, hoping it would force the enemy to reveal itself. The pulse cannon was their best chance to see what was hiding. But the silence stretched on as the seconds turned into minutes. Nothing. Then, without warning, the ship shuddered violently. Alarms screamed through the halls. The first missile strike came from the unseen enemy. It hit their outer shields, causing a massive explosion that rocked the entire vessel. The crew stumbled, thrown off balance as the lights flickered. They hadn't seen it coming. They had no idea where the enemy was. But they knew one thing. They were under attack. "Shields holding at 40%, shouted Ensign Torres, the young communications officer. "They're not showing up on any scans. It's like they're ghosts." Reed's heart pounded, but she remained focused. They had to return fire, and they had to do it fast. "Fire all weapons. Target anything that moves," she barked. We fight now, or we die here. The crew reacted immediately, the ship's weapons unleashing salvo after salvo into the void. But the enemy's stealth technology was so advanced that every shot seemed to vanish into the dark, with no trace left behind. They were fighting against an enemy that couldn't be seen, an enemy that controlled the battlefield with invisibility. "Captain, they're moving faster than we can track," Carter yelled. "We're sitting ducks out here." "We're not ducks," Reed replied firmly. "We're humans, and we don't give up." Another blast rocked the ship, sending the crew flying to the ground. Reed's hands clenched into fists as she gritted her teeth. She wasn't going to let the invaders take her crew or her people. They might not have the technology, but they had the one thing the aliens could never understand: human willpower. The crew scrambled to recalibrate their weapons, trying to predict where the next attack would come from. But it was clear this was no ordinary battle. The aliens were methodical, and their strikes were precise. The humans, on the other hand, were fighting with desperation and fury, refusing to let fear control them. It felt like an eternity, but Reed kept pushing forward, her eyes locked on the screens, searching for any sign of the enemy. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, something remarkable happened. A sudden distortion appeared on the radar, this time larger and more visible than before. The enemy's ship had finally shown itself. For the first time, they could see their opponent. But it wasn't enough. The alien ship was still invisible to most of their sensors, moving in and out of the detection range. "Target that distortion," Reed ordered. "Fire everything we've got." With a roar of power, the weapons systems fired in sync, launching a barrage of missiles at the distortion. It was a gamble, but it was the only shot they had. And in that moment, as the missiles tore through space, Captain Reed realized something vital. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for humanity's future. As the first wave of missiles hit, the distorted image of the alien ship flickered and then vanished, leaving nothing but empty space. But Reed knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The enemy would return, and they would be ready. Breaking the silence. The battle was far from over. Despite their best efforts, the enemy had remained elusive, slipping in and out of the shadows like ghosts. The crew of the Perseverance had fought valiantly, but they were running out of options. Reed stood at the command console, watching the silent void outside. The alien ships were still out there, watching and waiting. The only thing they knew for certain was that they were up against an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. But Captain Reed refused to let her crew fall into despair. They might not have the technology to fight back on equal terms, but they had something that the invaders didn't: human ingenuity. And in the face of overwhelming odds, that could make all the difference. "Captain," Lieutenant Carter's voice broke into her thoughts. "We've been monitoring the enemy for hours, and we've got nothing. They've just vanished again." Reed's eyes narrowed. "No, they're not gone. They're still here. Somewhere." The truth was, she didn't know where the enemy was hiding, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being baited, manipulated into thinking they were safe. She had to take a risk, a gamble, if they were going to stand a chance. The pulse weapon they had been using so far hadn't done much to reveal the enemy's position. It was time to try something different, something more aggressive. "Activate the new prototype," she ordered. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Captain, that's a highly experimental device. We don't know what it could do. It might be too dangerous." Reed turned to face him, her expression resolute. "We've already been pushed to the edge. There's no room for hesitation now. If we don't do something bold, we won't survive this." "Activate it, Lieutenant." Carter hesitated for only a moment before giving the order. The crew moved quickly to power up the new prototype, a deep space pulse generator designed to disrupt the very fabric of space itself. The theory behind it was simple. The pulse would create a temporary ripple in space-time, something the stealth ships couldn't hide from. But there were no guarantees. It could backfire, causing damage to the Perseverance, or worse, it might not even work. Reed stood still, watching the crew work, her breath steady. She was about to take a leap into the unknown, and the fate of her crew and the entire human race rested on this single moment. "Stand by," said the ship's engineer, Ensign Takahashi, his voice tense. "We're ready to fire in 3, 2, 1. A deep hum filled the ship as the pulse weapon powered up. Reed could feel the vibration in the walls, the anticipation in the air. Then, with a sudden, powerful surge, the weapon discharged. A brilliant burst of energy shot out into the void, the shockwave spreading through the fabric of space. For a moment, there was nothing. The ship was surrounded by an eerie, absolute silence. And then, suddenly, the distortion appeared. It wasn't a ship, at least not the way they thought of one. It was massive, like a shadow that stretched across the stars, a vessel too large to be fully seen by human eyes. But they could feel it. The distortion was sharp, its edges like jagged teeth, cutting through space. For the first time, the enemy was no longer invisible. The crew gasped in shock and awe. "It's real," Carter murmured, his voice filled with disbelief. But Reed's mind was already racing. The enemy was real. And now they had a target. "All guns, open fire," she shouted. The Perseverance launched a barrage of missiles, their payloads aimed directly at the now visible alien vessel. But it was too large, too well defended. The missiles impacted against a shimmering shield, the force of the explosion rippling outward into the void. The ship seemed to absorb the damage, barely flinching. "We're not doing enough damage," Ensign Takahashi yelled. "It's like hitting a wall of pure energy." Reed clenched her fists in frustration. The ship's shields were too strong, but she knew they couldn't afford to back down now. They had to keep pushing. Then, a loud crash echoed throughout the ship as another missile strike hit the Perseverance. The lights flickered and alarms blared. A direct hit to the engine room had caused a breach. They were losing power. "We've got to get that shield down," Reed muttered, thinking quickly. "Carter, target their shield generators. If we can disrupt them, maybe we can break through." Carter nodded, immediately relaying the order to the weapons officer. The Perseverance fired again, this time aiming for the heart of the alien ship's defensive systems. The enemy's shields flickered briefly, and for a split second, they were exposed. The human missiles flew through the opening, striking the core of the alien vessel with pinpoint accuracy. It was a gamble, but it paid off. The alien ship trembled, and its shield systems began to destabilize. They had done it. They had broken through. "Keep the pressure on," Reed commanded. "We've got one shot at this." But the enemy wasn't done. In the wake of the disruption, the alien ship unleashed a devastating counterattack. A pulse of energy so powerful, it knocked the Perseverance off course, sending the ship spinning through space. Reed's head slammed against the console as she fought to regain control. The entire crew was thrown into chaos, scrambling to keep the ship from falling apart. Through the blinding pain and confusion, one thing became clear to Reed. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Human willpower unleashed. The Perseverance lurched, shuddering violently as the aliens' counterattack rattled the ship's structure. Captain Olivia Reed fought to maintain control, her hands gripping the console tightly. The ship had taken significant damage, but it was still intact, still alive. It was the same for her crew. They were bruised, battered, but not beaten. "Damage report," Reed barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're down to 30% power, Captain," Ensign Takahashi reported, his voice strained. "Shields are barely holding. We've lost primary engines, and we're drifting." Reed's heart sank. They were stranded in the deep void of space, their ship severely crippled, and the enemy was still out there, lurking, waiting to finish what they had started. But she couldn't let herself fall into despair. Her crew depended on her, and humanity depended on them. "We don't have the luxury of giving up," Reed said, more to herself than anyone else. We'll fight through this. Every single one of us is here because we believe in each other, and that belief will be stronger than anything they throw at us. She turned to her crew, who were working in a frenzy to stabilize the ship. The tension in the air was thick, but beneath it was something else, something harder, something more resolute. The humans were tired, but they had something that the enemy lacked: human willpower. "We've been underestimating them," Reed said, looking at Carter, who was doing his best to keep track of the enemy's movements. "This battle isn't just about technology. It's about our will to survive. We fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone we've left behind. For humanity." Carter nodded grimly. "Captain, I believe you're right. We've been reactive, trying to meet their strength with our own. But now we need to take the fight to them. We can't keep waiting for them to make the next move." The crew began working in unison, their earlier fear now replaced with a newfound determination. They were going to turn the tide of the battle. There was no other choice. "We'll use the debris," Reed said, formulating a plan as she spoke. "They think we're dead in space. We'll make it look like we've given up. We'll use the wreckage of the ship, the wreckage of the Perseverance, to cover our movements. We'll be ghosts in the dark." Carter's eyes widened with realization. A decoy maneuver. "We'll mask our real position, make them chase shadows." "Exactly," Reed said, turning to Takahashi. "We need to power up the auxiliary engines, just enough to create the illusion that we're drifting helplessly. We'll hide behind the wreckage and wait for the right moment to strike." The crew worked quickly, recalibrating the ship's systems. It was risky, extremely risky, but it was the only shot they had. With their power low, their options were limited, but they were adapting. They would not go down without a fight. The enemy might have the advantage in technology, but humanity had the advantage in determination. After what felt like an eternity, the Perseverance drifted into the debris field. The wreckage from previous battles, both human and alien, surrounded them in an eerie, quiet maze. The crew set their course, slipping into the cover of shattered ship parts and floating debris. Their ship's lights were dimmed, and all systems were on standby, making it seem as though they had been completely disabled. The alien ships were nearby, patrolling, unaware that their prey had not been defeated. "We're in position," Carter reported. "We just have to wait for the right moment." Time passed in agonizing silence. Reed's nerves were on edge as she watched the alien vessels pass by, their sensors sweeping over the wreckage. The tension was unbearable. The crew held their breath, their bodies tense with the fear of being discovered. Then, without warning, the moment arrived. "Now," Reed shouted. With a roar, the Perseverance came to life, its auxiliary engines firing at full power, sending the ship surging forward. They launched every weapon they had left. Missiles, pulse blasts, anything that could be used as a weapon, into the heart of the alien fleet. The explosion rippled through space, the sudden attack catching the aliens off guard. "We've breached their formation," shouted Ensign Torres, the communications officer. "They're scattering." The alien ships, now visible in the wreckage field, attempted to regroup, but they had underestimated the humans' ability to fight back. Reed could feel the change in the air. The fear was gone, replaced with a burning sense of purpose. The Perseverance was no longer the hunted. They had become the hunters. For the first time in this battle, the humans were taking control. But even as the crew cheered their small victory, Reed knew this wasn't over. The enemy wasn't going to give up easily. They had only begun to fight. The Perseverance raced through the wreckage, firing relentlessly at the alien ships, pushing them further into retreat. Each blast they fired, each maneuver they made, sent a clear message. Humanity wasn't backing down. They would fight until their last breath. For the first time, the crew felt like they were not just surviving. They were winning. But Reed couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The enemy was powerful, and they would come back. And next time, they wouldn't make the same mistake. But for now, The humans had the upper hand. The silence had been broken. The invisible empire had been forced to reveal itself, and now humanity stood tall, ready to face whatever came next. The heart of battle. The Perseverance was no longer the fragile ship it had once been. It was a vessel forged by battle, and its crew was no longer a group of scared, inexperienced soldiers. They had become warriors, unified by purpose and fueled by the fire of human determination. They had tasted victory, however small, and that taste drove them forward. But Reed knew they couldn't rest. The enemy would not give up so easily. As she surveyed the ship's damaged systems, she realized that their resources were running low. They didn't have many missiles left. Their shields were weakening, and the crew was exhausted. They needed to make every moment count. "We're in the heart of the fight now," Reed said, standing at the command center. "We have to break their lines. We can't just play defense anymore. We need to push them back and make them question whether they can win this." Lieutenant Carter nodded, his face grim but resolute. "The enemy's regrouping. They'll come at us harder now. We need to be ready." Reed turned to her crew, all of whom were now ready for anything. They had become a well-oiled machine, working in harmony. The tension had not broken, but it had evolved into something stronger, a shared sense of resolve. Humanity had never been a species to back down when cornered. And now, in the vastness of space, with everything at stake, they were ready to give everything. "Activate all remaining weapon systems," Reed ordered. "We'll launch a full offensive. This is our chance to make a real difference." The crew sprang into action, their fingers flying over the controls. The Perseverance's weapons hummed to life, and the ship surged forward into the chaos of the battlefield. Outside, the alien fleet was regrouping, and for the first time since the battle had begun, they were preparing to attack in full force. "Captain," Takahashi called out from the engineering station, "we've got power surges in the main reactor. We might be able to overload it and send a burst of energy into their ships, but it's going to be risky. If we don't time it right, we'll be left with nothing." Reed thought for a moment. The idea of sacrificing their ship's remaining power to take out the enemy's core systems was dangerous, but it could also be the turning point they desperately needed. The power surges could disable their shields long enough to strike a decisive blow. She weighed the risks, but there was no time for hesitation. "Do it," she commanded. "We don't have the luxury of playing it safe anymore." As the Perseverance moved closer to the enemy fleet, Reed could feel the weight of the decision. If the plan failed, they would be sitting ducks in the middle of an enemy formation. But if it succeeded, it could be the decisive blow that shifted the tide of the war. The alien ships, sensing the human ship's movement, opened fire. Beams of energy lanced out from the dark void, slamming into the Perseverance's weakened shields. The ship rocked with every impact, but it held. Barely. "Brace for impact," Reed shouted as another wave of fire pounded their shields. The ship trembled violently, but the shields flared brightly, absorbing the energy blasts. The crew fought to keep control as the Perseverance charged deeper into the heart of the alien fleet. With every shot fired, with every evasive maneuver, they drew closer to their target. The tension was unbearable, but there was no turning back. Finally, Takahashi gave the signal. "It's ready, Captain. We've overloaded the reactor." "Now, do it," Reed said. "Release the burst." The Perseverance's engines flared, and for a split second, the ship seemed to glow with an otherworldly power. Then, in a flash of pure energy, a massive shockwave erupted from the ship, ripping through space and sending a pulse of raw power directly into the heart of the alien fleet. The explosion was magnificent. The shockwave tore through the alien ship's shields, disabling their defensive systems and sending several vessels into disarray. Some exploded outright, while others veered off course, their systems failing. The alien fleet, once organized and unstoppable, was now scattered and vulnerable. "Captain, we did it," Carter exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief and awe. "Their shields are down. We've broken their formation." But the fight was far from over. Reed's eyes scanned the battlefield, and she saw the remnants of the alien ships regrouping. The enemy had taken a significant blow, but they weren't defeated. The damage to their fleet was extensive, but the remaining ships were still dangerous. "We've got them on the ropes, but they're not down yet," Reed said, her voice steadied despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. "We hit them hard, but now we need to finish what we started." The crew, now fully aware of the stakes, readied themselves for the final push. The Perseverance was battered, bruised, and on the brink of exhaustion, but humanity's determination burned bright within them. They would not stop until their enemy was defeated. As the Perseverance surged forward again, this time the crew didn't flinch. Every weapon, every maneuver, every decision was made with the knowledge that they were fighting not just for survival, but for the future of humanity. With a rallying cry from their captain, the crew unleashed everything they had left. Together, they would finish this fight. Victory and the new dawn. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of flashing lights and debris, the shattered remains of alien ships drifting through the cold void. The Perseverance had pushed forward relentlessly, every blast and maneuver adding to the growing evidence that humanity was fighting with everything it had. Reed stood at the command console, her fingers hovering over the controls as her eyes scanned the remains of the alien fleet. "We've done it," Lieutenant Carter said softly, his voice carrying a note of awe. "Their forces are broken. They're retreating." Reed took a deep breath, her gaze hardening as she surveyed the damage around them. The Perseverance was battered, her systems barely holding together. But they had survived. They had pushed the invaders back, and for the first time, it felt like they had taken control of the fight. "We've only won one battle," Reed replied. "The war isn't over. But this is a message. A message that humanity will not go down without a fight." The crew shared a moment of quiet triumph, each of them knowing that they had done something extraordinary. They had faced an enemy that was far beyond anything they had ever encountered and had come out victorious, at least for now. The alien ships were retreating, their broken formations slowly drifting away, unable to recover from the devastating blows they had received. The silence that had plagued the battlefield earlier had now turned into something different, something human. The battle was over, and the enemy had learned that humanity would never yield. But as the excitement settled, Reed's mind began to race. There was something about this victory that didn't sit right with her. The enemy had retreated, but their defeat didn't feel final. As she stared into the vast expanse of space, her instincts told her that this was only the beginning of something far larger. A sudden signal interrupted her thoughts. A communication from Earth Command. "Captain Reed, this is Earth Command. Congratulations on your victory. You've made humanity proud." Reed's eyes flicked to the screen. The relief in their voices was evident. "Thank you, Commander. But we need reinforcements. The enemy might be retreating, but I'm not convinced we've seen the last of them. There's more to this invasion than we can comprehend. We need to be ready." The response from Earth Command was immediate. "Understood, Captain. We'll begin assembling a fleet to support you. Stay alert and prepare for the next phase." Reed nodded and cut the transmission. She turned to Carter, her face grim. "We might have won today, but we've only scratched the surface. We're going to need everything we've got, and more." Carter met her gaze. "We'll be ready, Captain." The crew of the Perseverance had fought together like a single organism. They had proven that humanity's strength wasn't just in its technology, but in its heart. No matter how advanced the enemy was, no matter how great the odds, humanity's will to survive had carried them through. It was that spirit that had allowed them to fight, and it was that spirit that would guide them forward. The silence of space had once been oppressive, threatening to overwhelm them. But now, it was different. The silence had been broken, and with it came a new dawn. Humanity had shown the universe that they were not to be underestimated, and that no matter how dark the future seemed, there was always hope. The Perseverance continued its journey through the stars, battered but unbroken, its crew more united than ever. Reed looked out into the endless expanse, her heart filled with resolve. The battle had been fierce, but humanity had proven that it could face the unimaginable and come out stronger. The universe was vast and unknown, but humanity was ready for whatever came next. As the ship moved onward, Reed couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had unlocked something much greater. The galaxy was shifting, and humanity was at the center of it. There was still much to be done, many more battles to fight, but they would face it together. They would rise, they would conquer, and they would never be silenced again. Humanity's journey was only just beginning.